people don't like change. We all want to. We want to lean in, but people do not like change. And in particular, if you have been doing a process a certain way that has worked for you for 10 years or 20 years or something, adapting that process to a new tool, even though it might be better, it's a hard thing to do.
Welcome to Speaking C-Suite, where today's CFOs have evolved from financial gatekeepers to strategic force multipliers, driving growth across the entire organization. I'm David Hemenway. I'm the host of the Angel Nest podcast, and I'm joined by Johnnie Walker from Rooled, outsourced CFO and accounting services. Rooled are the startup finance experts, and they are the driving force behind this series. Great to be back with you, Johnnie.
Great to be here again, David. Thank you.
So today, we're diving into the critical decisions every scaling CFO faces, how to build a finance tech stack that actually scales, and when to bet on emerging platforms versus proven systems, and why the right hire can outperform any tool. Joining us is Katie Royce. She's the Chief Financial Officer of ZenBusiness, a mission-driven platform that's helped almost 1 million entrepreneurs start, run, and grow their businesses. Since joining in 2022, she's led the company's transformation into a subscription-first, tech-enabled platform, more than doubling its scale while building a modern, data-driven finance function that powers growth, not just reports on it. Katie believes great finance leaders don't just communicate numbers, they provide context, helping teams and boards see around corners and make smarter decisions. Welcome, Katie, and thanks for joining us on Speaking C-Suite and for making the trip into our New York studio today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great.
Thank you. And just before we get into the meat of things here, I just want to say another big shout out to our sponsors, Left Tabs and Rooled, each of the tech platforms which we use in day-to-day work at Rooled. We really appreciate their support. They're enabling things to actually make this happen. And I also think the topics we're going to get into today really do cover quite a lot of the principles and usage of these tech platforms. So this is going to be an exciting conversation.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, Katie, you've mentioned how finance tech platforms need to solve for the majority of problems and try to avoid getting lost in the myriad of edge cases. What advice would you give to the tech platform companies themselves about maintaining that focus?
Yeah, I love this. By the way, I love this topic in particular. I like it when platforms have a point of view, right? Like most of the time in finance, sometimes they're systems of record, sometimes we take data out of it, manipulate it, but oftentimes these are platforms that are running a workflow, hopefully almost for us, right? And that understanding of that workflow is almost something I want a point of view on from a vendor that's an expert in this field. I may be doing it a certain way, and I'd love to know if there's a better mousetrap. And I think sometimes, particularly early stage, it feels good to start to customize and kind of masquerade that as being flexible. But my advice would be have a point of view, stick to the core, and really deeply understand that core workflow as well, if not better, than the customer base.
So almost in that respect, there's an aspect of being maybe not rigid, but certainly quite persistent in like the core focus early on.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're small, you want to be able to have a bit more flexibility, and rigid would be something I think, especially early stage product and engineering would pull back at that word. But I do think that for platforms to really scale, staying true to the core and having a little bit of rigidity, for lack of a better word, around those core workflows is actually pretty important, I think, for scale and also for eventually kind of ease of use within the customer's environments.
Do you think with these, so you see a lot of startups, of course, that are making tools for developers. And so that's developers making tools for developers. So they understand intimately the nature of the work. And so probably out the gate, they can see a particular workflow mousetrap that's going to have some validity. What is the right setup for a company that's going to target finance accounting, but probably with there's like developer backgrounds to various, and like, where is it necessary to have that real finance experience early in that sort of founding team member set?
For me, when I think about that, almost everything in finance it's almost, a lot of things are very sequential, I should say. And when some of these platforms very deliberately go deep in one workflow, But that workflow is almost never siloed from sequencing something else. And I think a good kind of broad area here is an accounting close, right? It's very sequential. It kicks off many other things. FP&A teams tend to do their work, their forecasting, reporting, closing out of modeling at different points once accounting says something is closed. I think it's that sort of sequential nature, or A informs B, which allows C to happen inside of a finance organization, is probably the type of thing, if you're developing a tool, you might want somebody that really deeply understands that to inform maybe how you build, or at least where you allow flexibility, integration points, outputs, etc.
Yeah, makes total sense.
But it sounds like at the beginning you're really saying focus, focus.
Yes, and I'll be curious if you guys get any reactions to this. Sound and boring infrastructure wins all day long. It just does. And that, I think, I wouldn't underestimate that.
Yeah, and how about some of the companies that start out actually being a blend of software and consulting? That gets very labor intensive very quickly.
It does, and it's funny. So before this startup, I worked for a behemoth IT services firm. And to maybe state the obvious, but I'll say it here, implementations are hard, right? And I think the question is why, and do they need to be? And I think we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later with AI. But, that this is where choosing a tool that has enough integrations, right? And you have to know what tools you're going to really resist ripping out. And as you look to add new tools in, integrations become important. But also this consulting around this. One of the things I think that is always underestimated with a new tool is the change management.
Yeah.
People don't like change. We all want to. We want to lean in, but people do not like change. And in particular, if you have been doing a process a certain way that has worked for you for 10 years or 20 years or something, adapting that process to a new tool, even though it might be better, it's a hard thing to do. And so one of the things I love to look at is you almost always choose a tool, and this may not be relevant for very kind of narrow workflow solutions, but take a billing and RevRec solution as an example. The thing that tipped you over the point may have been RevRec, or it may have been billing. And when you look at platforms like that, I almost guarantee you there's one sort of use case or part of the tool that tips over the decision to implement it.
Yep.
And then the question is, do you ever use the rest of the platform? And it's that change management. And I look at this a lot when we put in a little bit of a broader tool, is how many of the features are used? How much have we adopted of it? Are we really pressing on? And the answer is almost always not really what you'd want from a CFO who's paying for the whole thing, whether we're using a quarter of it or more.
Yeah, we had another guest who called it shelfware.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. So it's almost in a way that the change management is not just one time, it's ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's almost, look, for me, we get busy, and I sometimes slack off on this, but yeah, I often have been known to ask, what are we using in that tool today that we weren't 6 months ago when we implemented it, or a year in? What other use cases have we found? And so, for me, if it's a good tool and we implemented it well, you should see greater adoption over time. Sure, on day one, it's whatever it is that tipped you into choosing that solution, but hopefully over time you get greater adoption. But that kind of cross-functional buy-in and change management, and I'm oversimplifying, but for me that's the hard part of this, and often why you have consultants. It's often probably less maybe on the actual implementation piece of it.
Oh, so in a way, the actual execution or the technical challenges of the actual implementation aren't that significant, but it's about getting the team qualified and to use it.
It depends. Yeah. It depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of what you're putting in, the layers of what you're putting in, how you would categorize your own data hygiene, right? And that's another topic. So certainly the technical aspects are real.
Yeah.
But I think the long tail of professional services or consulting services, that long tail is often around change management. And Great.
Understood.
Because you're if you do it well, right, you're incented to try and get people to adopt more and more of the platform, i.e., I mean, depending on pricing, you may end up making more, but if not, inherently, you at least increase stickiness.
Yeah.
If you only use one part of a platform, you're a little bit more tempted to at least peak when a new competitor comes on the market versus if you've got
You're all in.
cross-functional teams all in on something.
Yeah,
right?
then it's much, yep.
So I'm curious, as you look at all these platforms, what are the indicators to you that some of them have the right architecture for growth?
Yeah, this is a good one. Okay. There's going to be some of the kind of foundational things, right, around SOX certification and accounting integrity, as I call it, right? Like you want to be able to lock periods. You want to be able to you don't want people to be able to edit journal entries. You want a little bit of like mapping features to be a little bit flexible. The ability to have kind of multi-tenant, lots of integrations, clean data modeling. Absolute must for me is really strong audit trails.
Yep.
So those are the things I think of that you are in that it's kind of a must-have if you're wanting to scale. And then conversely, when I think about the things that work for a while and then they become painful at a scale is one, doing too much, two, manual workloads. And so this is where you come into this. You have a tool. It feels good to customize it. Almost everybody selling you something says, yeah, this is what we have, but you can customize it. And I think the question is, does that customization, is that going to scale or is it going to create a lot of manual workload? That tends to break. Favorite kind of pet peeve of mine is like a free form note field that really should be like a data field. And maybe that'll change with AI. That may not be.
Because people will use it in all sorts of different ways.
All sorts of different ways.
Important information ends up in there.
And I think one of the other things that's important for scale, again, depending on what it is, and I think of this for, let's take a financial planning tool.
Yeah.
So if you're the finance team, you want to be able to see everything, edit everything, do scenario planning, do forecasting. But you may want to be able to only have your product team or your marketing team or your sales team be able to see one piece.
Yeah.
Maybe they can edit it. Maybe they can view only it. And one, you don't want to pay for all the different types of views, but also that sort of modularization of I want my sales team to be able to see this, at least see it, or maybe input certain fields. Yeah. That type of thing becomes very important with scale.
Yeah. We actually had this precise situation with one of the clients, and we did use actually a left to solve it, and there was a COO who really was owning the full P&L, but they weren't really supposed to see any of the underlying salary detail.
Yeah.
So we had the CEO who could then see the salary detail, which popped out then a gross salary compensation number, and that goes into then the P&L budget, and they could see that bit. But it was all linked behind the scenes. So I'm only looking at one thing. So it wasn't two different bits managed. And I think that's an exact, scenario out there.
Yeah. Talking about problems with implementation, we feel like AI is going to be helpful with this, right? And we have to ask everybody this question because it's the question of our time. Where is AI actually delivering value and ROI?
Yeah. Okay. So I think if I can, step back even from implementation. And I think this depends on how robust of a process you have when you're choosing tools. But for me, there's always a business case. Why do we need it? Can it replace something else? So I think AI is super helpful in a lot of that, almost building up to choosing, signing, and then implementing a tool. The business case for it. It can help with RFPs, market research. We use it in a way, at ZenBusiness, we are heavy users of Confluence, Jira, Slack, and we also use Glean. And so there is a lot of information that's captured just in our day-to-day conversations and meetings about pain points, requirements, and things like that, that if you use AI, it almost can do a very good job gathering requirements through those organic meetings and conversations about something that aren't even specific to scoping out a tool. And that's pretty cool. We've seen some good results there. Data mapping, testing, doing QA with agents. We've done a lot of, once something's implemented, videos of how to use it or how we'd like people to use it, and then using AI to transform that into documentation or training modules. So all of that, to me, AI has really taken a big lift off of teams. Where I think it works with, again, is data mapping and things like that. Where it lags is when you've got multiple layers of data that you're doing cross-system work. And it also clearly can't solve for my favorite, the user adoption challenge, right? So I think there's still room for AI, but for me, I'm seeing a lot more real use case and time saving and actually improvement, more almost in that upfront, a little bit on the actual implementation, depending on how complex the data environment and what you're doing.
Some of the things you described, in a way, it's not really so much transformational in terms of how it's affecting us. It's incremental improvements. It's taking tasks that would otherwise be some portion of time, which we're getting back. And I think we're seeing something similar. Another example is the AI flux analysis, which again actually happens with Aleph. And that they have integrated, the one example where they have integrated data from different systems, they've pulled it into their environment. But you've got payroll detail and you've got P&L detail, and it can combine those source data in a flux analysis. And that is something you'd otherwise have to do manually by going and looking through reports and sheets and whatnot. So I think you're getting something there. It's not changing dramatically the job that you're doing, but it's making you more efficient at doing something you would otherwise have to do.
Interesting. Let's talk about emerging tech platforms. I'm curious, what's your criteria for evaluating them, for doing trials? Are you always looking for better solutions, or is it specifically in areas that you think need current improvement? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think my answer today is probably different than if you'd asked me this 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So I'll take finance maybe a little separately than what we've tried to instill in the culture. We want a lot of trial and error with AI, right? And so it's something we are very much encouraging everyone in the company to do. Now, for me, for our risk team, for our legal team, privacy, there are always going to be some guardrails in place. We have to be careful, but we really want people to be experimenting and trialing, right? And that is also true for the finance team. Now, I think for me, it still does come back to, though, like, what is the business case for it? So if we do this, particularly if it's a let's rip and replace something versus an incremental tool, there still does need to be a strong business case for it. Depending on what it is, I think there's still some concern or risk about which of these companies will be around in 3 years or 5 years. So with all those caveats, we are encouraging a lot of experimentation. And now's the time, right? There are a lot of new tools on the market. You can trial. You can often get free trials for a longer period than you probably could have 3 years ago. You can get shorter kind of contract durations. And I would be curious, I think from our perspective, we're trying to sign, again, depending on the pain of the process of implementation, shorter contracts than maybe we would have a few years ago. I think if you're in an environment now where you've got access to these tools and you're not experimenting with them, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. And I think some of the ones, the well-known ones, ChatGPT or Anthropic or whatever, the prices are pretty low for something that is fairly high performance. So I think in almost no way there's no excuse for not having it. How do you think when you see these platforms, talking generically again, that claim to be using AI and whatever, how do you think about that sort of layered data confidentiality in there? Do you have a stage where you review the contract documentation for their commitment, that data that they're then submitting to an AI LLM tool or whatever is then not getting disseminated somewhere else? How do you think about the real security of your own data that you know is going to be passed through these systems?
Yeah, so we have, and again, in the business, we have credit card, we have social security numbers, we have EIN numbers for businesses that are formed. And so privacy, security, it's a fundamental part of the business, right? Yep. We can't do what we do without meeting a very high threshold of that. And so in our review process, we take procurement of tools pretty seriously. And so this is all part of when you down select to a tool, or even if it's not a true RFP and you want to try something, depending on the type of data that it touches, it goes through a security review, privacy data, et cetera. And it's interesting, we've been thinking about this with our own AI platform that we're using that's customer facing, where what do we actually need to expose, i.e. in there, the EIN number as an example, what actually needs to be exposed versus just the knowledge of what the answer is, but then it directs a customer to where that information is in their dashboard, but it doesn't actually display it within so there's a lot of those things that we're still kind of working through.
Yeah. Moving target.
Curious if you've made a bet on a platform that you were really excited about but didn't work out, and what did you learn from it if you did?
Yeah, we did. I
won't
name
names
it.
necessary.
And look, I would say this is quite honestly part platform, but also part learning for me, right? So this is my first earlier stage company. I've been at big companies before. We hit a pretty big milestone on a revenue number a few years ago, and we started to think about an FP&A planning and forecasting tool. And we went through search, we trialed some things, and we picked one. And we started the implementation, and within a couple of months, realized that our actual business model was changing. And so, as an example, we are in one part of the business, we're very B2C in how we go to market. We've built an enterprise functionality since then. It's a totally different go-to-market, totally different billing cycle. It doesn't look anything like the B2C business. We, at the time, for example, only had annual subscription or transaction products. Now we have annual, monthly transactions and things that revenue is only recognized upon fulfillment, which may be a year from the time we sold the product. None of those things were in place when we put the tool in. So it's flexible. It's not really. Basically, you took the model that we'd built over the years, we put it into the planning tool, and we realized pretty quickly that as the business was evolving, we were going to be building new parts of the model, still in spreadsheets, and then putting it into the tool, and it felt, what are we doing here? So we halted it. We didn't go through with it. We ripped it out. And now we're several years later, and we still don't have one. We keep looking at them. We keep thinking about it. But this is the area that I'm curious to watch. There are good FP&A planning and forecasting tools, but I bet you'd be hard-pressed to find any finance person that's not still deeply wedded to Excel or Google Sheets.
Exactly. I think there's that innate flexibility. Like you're starting with a blank sheet pretty much every time, and you can just create some asset that's needed instantly, and then you can preserve it as well. There was actually somebody posted online recently, and they described that what the issue with Excel is not its flexibility or anything, it's the fact that it marries in one unit both the computation piece, the formulas, plus the data. So both are in the same thing. And so you've got this kind of real challenge around version control, the stability of the data, and then how do you separate and ensure the integrity of that computation piece. And that's why I think there is a model emerging right now, and I think Aleph is a good example of it, where they're really separating. They're saying your data is going to be held in a rigorous database-oriented environment, which you can access reliably, very consistently, etc., and your computation ends up currently in Excel, but that is going to evolve itself. I think we're going to see different platforms for doing low-code, no-code type computation and finance. So I think it's a really interesting time that's going to evolve.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's talking about human in the loop, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how far that goes and how far that's maintained. Are there things that we should not be trying to automate? Maybe there are just specific skill sets that people should always be relied upon for.
Yeah. And I think judgment is incredibly important in general, also in finance, right? It would be, I shouldn't say easy, but it feels like it would be easy to make all of finance very rule-based. And that you could do. Is that the right answer? Is that how you help a business grow? And I always use this word. I try not to think of finance or HR or as corporate functions or administrative functions. I talk about them as enablement functions, right? And try to live that every day and have my teams live that every day. And that requires judgment, right? And I'm not sure we can really replace that without people. I also think and maybe tools could help here, but when I think about building teams, you need this combination of people that are very almost like broad athletes, right? They can play in a lot of different ways. And then maybe it's scale, or maybe it's a new part of the business or something else. You reach a point where maybe you want more of a subject matter expert. And if you identify that and hire for that, you get this lifting of all boats across the team. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think tools can help. AI will probably help more over time. But again, I think you still want to have the right mix of skill sets. And then the question for me, at least right now, is if I can get that right, can I double this business again without growing finance headcount or without doubling finance headcount? We've at ZenBusiness, we've more than doubled since I've been here, and the size of the finance seems the same. Yeah. And can I do that again? Can we get another double and not add it? I'm not sure I can do that again, but that's how I think about it. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the right combination of skill sets.
And is that so? Just in that example there with the doubling, where would you say that the sort of major or the top two workflows that really would otherwise have scaled to demand more resource that you were able to strategically keep efficient?
Yeah, I would say for us, it's really been around revenue and technical accounting. So this was an area that with the controller, we decided to invest in pretty early on. And we brought in a subject matter expert on both technical accounting and revenue. And why was that important? One, to my earlier comment about a rapidly evolving business where we go from offering one type of product to 4 or 5 with different revenue recognition policies, building an enterprise go-to-market motion that's very different than B2C, those type of things early on, as much as very similar to the conversation we're here about having startups, as much as you want to standardize all of your contracts, when you're starting something new, you tend to not do that as much. And these are all things that having somebody who knew this stuff cold, as well as when we're starting to we were uplifting audit standards and all of that, that was a perfect example of an unlock. Like bringing in somebody there with extreme, it allowed the business to move as fast.
Yep.
It allowed us to get done in accounting what we wanted to do on the uplift. And as we were scaling, we were doing it with policy and systems and things that were right from the beginning and scaled well with the business.
Almost like you knew what you were going to require from these systems. So what you were looking for next, you were very clear in your understanding of what you would need from them. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So for CFOs building their teams, Katie, what specialized skills or capabilities should they be thinking about? And how do you identify those high leverage hires that can really transform finance and operations?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think for me, there's also a big unlock in finding a person or a combination of people that have a very strong bend towards business and operations. So they understand deeply where the levers are in product, how to really improve margin, can opine on go-to-market. And so that blend, as well as a good view on more what I think of as like corporate FP&A, which is the sort of all-up budgeting and forecasting, et cetera. So I like to sometimes add into teams, and I think you see this a lot at bigger companies where you've got the resource, this kind of split between corporate team and a field finance or business unit finance, et cetera. At small companies, you may not be able to like fully break that apart, but trying to blend in those type of skill sets, I think really is an accelerant for finance. Having some folks that have spent time really deep in a product organization or in a go-to-market organization or if it's a regional model, have been more of a GM of a region, like that kind of thing where they feel very close tie to the business as well as have the kind of core finance skills.
Actually, in one of our other interviews, we talked about how the CFO role has evolved over the course of the last, let's say, 2 decades or more, where I think you go back in time and you see the CFO or finance department as a very siloed, quite separate. It was a department that reported on stuff that nobody else really touched or saw. But now you've got like the necessary qualities of CFO actually are that appreciation for the business as a whole. And really, I guess you'd agree with that in that respect.
100%, and as part of the introduction, I think one of the key things there is context, right? And I talk about that a lot. It's very different than reporting. It's very different than communication. Sometimes I think communication is just a slight distant cousin from reporting. It can be one-sided versus contextualization to me is, can you really help different parts of the business understand the why, the what happened, but then also, and probably more importantly, what can their specific area do to influence something, right? And I think about this a lot. We still do all hands meetings, and we have a set of KPIs that we talk about. And do those KPIs resonate with everyone? Do they know if we're red on something, what they can do? And obviously not everybody in an organization can influence every KPI, but do they know what they can do in their role to help move the needle towards green? That is great context for finance. And if finance is delivering that, again, this is that enablement, that you'll see immediately the business wants them in the room.
Yeah.
It doesn't become a forcing function. It's they want them there because it really is an enabler. It's a partnership. And of course, finance has guardrails, and we say no to certain things. And we have to do that aspect of it as well. But that's certainly not the only role.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You're saying something really interesting, especially as it relates to all these AI conversations. There's never going to be really a substitute for human judgment, and it's really important even in finance. CFO is not a CFO is not a CFO. It needs to meet the needs of the specific organization and the specific industry, and what I'll call domain expertise really still matters.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, that's great. Katie Royce, Chief Financial Officer of ZenBusiness. Thank you so much for making your way through the New York City traffic to come visit us in our studio just outside of Times Square today. It was great.
It's been great fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Katie. Really appreciate it.
right.
Thank you.
All right. Johnnie Walker, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Always and again. Thank you, David.
This has been Speaking C-Suite, exploring how finance leaders can become true strategic partners and drive growth across their companies. Check us out on YouTube and all the major podcast platforms. I'm David Hemenway, the founder and host of the Angel Nest podcast, where we've done many other episodes with Johnnie Walker from Rooled, so you can check him out at theangelnest.com or at Rooled.com. Thanks for tuning in. So long until next time.